Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. When I was just 10 years old, my mother tasked me with staying home alone while she went out to grab some milk from the local store. I can still vividly recall the excitement I felt, knowing that I was finally trusted to take on the responsibility of being alone in our home. My mom had given me clear instructions to follow while she was out, such as not using the stove or oven, not answering the door for strangers, and most importantly, not going outside. I took these rules seriously, but as time went on, I started to feel restless and bored. I remember making my way through each room of our home, pretending to be a spy and trying to find secret passageways. However, the thrill of the adventure soon gave way to a sense of lonesomeness and isolation. I decided to return to my room and switch on the TV, hoping to find some company in the characters on the screen. As I lay there, absorbed in the program, I heard a noise that made me freeze in my tracks. It was coming from the ceiling above me, like something was moving around up in the attic. Initially, I convinced myself that it was just my imagination, but as the noise grew louder, my doubts dissipated. Then I heard it. The sound that made my heart feel like it was going to leap out of my chest. It was a voice, but not like any voice I had ever heard before. It was guttural and deep, like something from a horror film. I couldn't quite make out what it was saying, but I knew that it wasn't human. I was overwhelmed with fear, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be making that noise. I was too terrified to go out to the attic to investigate, so instead, I crawled under my bed and prayed that whatever was up there would stay put. I remained paralyzed under my bed, listening intently to the bizarre noises coming from the attic. It sounded like someone was up there, pacing back and forth and talking to themselves in a low growl. I couldn't make out the words they were saying, but their tone sent shivers down my spine. I tried to stay calm to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the minutes ticked by, my anxiety continued to build. I was starting to feel like I was trapped in a horror movie, waiting for the inevitable jump scare. Finally, I heard the front door open, and the sound of my mother's voice called out to me. I scrambled out from under the bed, nearly tripping over myself in the process, and ran to the door to greet her. As she entered the house, I bombarded her with questions, asking if she had heard the noises, if she had seen anything strange, anything that could explain what I had experienced. But my mother just looked at me with a confused expression, as if she didn't know what I was talking about. She assured me that everything was fine, that it was probably just the house settling or a mouse scurrying around in the walls. But I knew what I had heard, and I knew something was still up there. In the days that followed, I became increasingly paranoid. Every little noise made me jump, and I was convinced that something was watching me, following me around the house. I spent most of my time in the living room, where I felt the safest, avoiding my bedroom at all costs. One day, I mustered up the courage to go back up to the attic and investigate. Armed with a flashlight and determination, I climbed up the creaky old stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The attic was dark and musty, and the air was thick with cobwebs. I shone my flashlight around, scanning every corner of the room for any sign of what could have been making those strange noises. And that's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, there was a small hole in the wall. It was just big enough for someone to crawl through, and as I shone my flashlight inside, I saw old food wrappers and a pillow. It's as if someone was sleeping there. I now had a feeling that the noise I heard was a real person. I ran downstairs and called my mom, who later rang the police. They came into their investigation. Turns out someone had been living in our attic for months and would leave in the morning. That person never returned, and the police are still looking for them. They must have realized their small home in my attic was discovered. I can still remember that night like it was yesterday. I was 14 years old and my parents were out for dinner, leaving me home alone for the first time. I was excited at first, thinking I was big enough to handle it all by myself, so they didn't call a babysitter. I was excited at first, thinking I could do whatever I wanted without anyone telling me what to do. The night started out great. I watched some TV, ate some snacks, and even did my homework. But as the night grew darker, I started to feel a bit uneasy. I could hear the wind howling outside and the trees rustling against my window, and it made me feel like I wasn't really alone. That's when it happened. someone started knocking on the door. At first, I thought it was just the wind or a stray animal, but it kept getting louder and more persistent. I tried to ignore it and hope that whoever it was would just go away, but the knocking only grew louder. I got up from the couch and walked towards the door, hesitating for a few seconds before looking through the peephole. It was a man standing outside, with his face obscured by the darkness. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could make out that he was wearing a hoodie and jeans. My heart started racing, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. Who was he, and why was he knocking on my door? I decided to stay put and not answer, hoping he would leave soon. But he didn't. The knocking continued, louder and more persistent than before. I felt panic rising within me. I couldn't believe that I was home alone, with a stranger knocking at my door. I walked over to the window and peeked outside, hoping to see if he was still there. I could see his silhouette in the darkness, walking around outside the house. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. I felt relieved, thinking that he had finally left. But my relief was short-lived when he started calling out my name. Cindy. Cindy, are you there? His voice was scratchy and low, and it sent shivers down my spine. How did he know my name? Was he watching me? I froze, unsure of what to do next. I decided to stay hidden and not make a sound, hoping that you would think I wasn't home. But he continued calling out my name, and I could hear him trying to open the door. Panic set in, and I ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on my bed, clutching my phone and crying softly. I didn't know what to do. I was scared and alone with the stranger trying to break into my house. I called my parents, but they didn't pick up. They were probably in a restaurant with loud music and couldn't hear their phone ringing. I was all by myself, with no one to turn to for help. I could hear the man outside, still trying to open the door. I could hear him walking around, and his footsteps seemed to be getting closer to my bedroom window. I felt like I was in a horror movie with no escape and no one to save me. Then, just when I thought it was over for me, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was my parents. I ran to the front door crying and opened it, telling them everything that had happened. My dad was so concerned after I told him someone was outside that he went in the house and grabbed his rifle. We called the police and they came to investigate. They found footprints outside and even some scratches on the door. It was clear that someone had been trying to break in. I was terrified for weeks after that. Every time I heard a noise outside, I would jump and hide. I never wanted to be home alone again. Looking back on it now, I realize how lucky I was. If my parents hadn't come home when they did, who knows what could have happened. It's a scary thought, but it's one that I'll never forget. The next day, my parents installed a security system and made sure that I knew how to use it. They also made sure to never leave me home alone again. It was a relief to know that I was safe and protected, but the memory of that night still haunts me to this day. I often wonder who that man was and why he was calling out my name. Was he a random stranger or someone who knew me? Did he have a grudge against my family? I'll never know for sure, but I do know that I never want to experience something like that again. It was just another miserable rainy day at work, and I had spent the entire day delivering pizza to people who couldn't be bothered to cook for themselves. It was an exhausting job, but someone had to do it. By the time I got back home, all I wanted to do was collapse onto the sofa and do absolutely nothing. As I settled in, I realized that I had the whole apartment to myself. My roommates had gone on vacation, leaving me to enjoy some much-needed alone time. I made myself a sandwich, popped open a soda, and flipped through the channels on TV. I could watch whatever I wanted on TV, make as much noise as I wanted, and eat whatever I wanted without anyone bothering me. But as hours ticked by, I began to feel tired and restless. Before I knew it, I must have dozed off because I was jolted awake by the sound of the front door unlocking. I was disoriented at first, thinking that my roommate must have come back early. But then, 2 masked men barged into the apartment, wielding crowbars. At first, I was frozen, unable to move or speak. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I couldn't believe it was happening to me. My heart was pounding in my chest as I realized that these guys were not here to deliver pizza. They were up to no good, and I needed to act fast. Without thinking, I sprinted to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I could hear the intruders shouting and cursing, their anger and frustration palpable. I could hear the sound of glass shattering and wood splintering as they smashed everything in sight. It was terrifying. My mind was racing as I tried to think of what to do. Should I try to escape through the window? Should I hide under the bed? I knew I had to stay calm and call for help. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to dial 911 if needed, but tried to remain quiet and still. I could hear the burglars rummaging through the apartment, smashing things as they went. It was a terrifying sound, and my mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I began to feel like I was in a horror movie, trapped and helpless. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the sweat on my palms. I tried to take deep breaths to calm myself down, but it was difficult to control the fear that had taken hold of me. As the minutes ticked by, the masked men seemed to be getting closer and closer to my room. I could hear them talking to each other, their voices getting louder and more agitated. I tried to make myself as small as possible, hiding behind my bed and praying that they wouldn't find me. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. One of the guys said, "Let's check this room, maybe he's in here." My heart sank as I realized that they were looking for someone. At that moment, I knew that I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait for them to find me. I remember that I had a baseball bat under my bed, and I slowly reached for it, trying to make as little noise as possible. I held the bat tightly in my hand, my heart racing as I prepared for the worst. But then, to my relief, I heard the sound of sirens outside. The police had arrived. I heard the men cursing and scrambling to escape as the police shouted for them to surrender. Within minutes, the apartment was filled with officers, and the two intruders were apprehended and taken away in handcuffs. As the adrenaline began to wear off, I felt the weight of what had just happened settling on me. I had narrowly avoided a dangerous situation, and the thought of what could have happened chilled me to the bone. The police took my statement, and I explained everything that had happened. They assured me that I had done the right thing by staying calm and calling for help. It turned out that they were after my roommate, who had been having problems with them. They had mistaken me for him and had come to the apartment thinking that he would be there. I was just a lucky bystander who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The next day, my roommates returned from vacation, and I recounted the terrifying ordeal to them. We were all shaken by what had happened, but grateful that no one had been hurt. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, worried that the guys might come back for revenge. It took some time, but eventually I was able to move on and put the experience behind me. I left that place and moved back in with my parents for a while. I'm glad I escaped that one with my life. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.